Right. Welcome, everyone. So we are so excited about today's webinar. Today we'll be doing an update on what's happening with the Farm Bill, what's next with the Farm Bill, and tracking what the implications might be for us in Minnesota. Some of you might have joined a webinar that we did last year, giving a Farm Bill 101 overview. And this is a follow-up to that, just checking in on how things are going. And I will share in the chat a link where all of you can find the previous webinar in case you want a refresher on just what is the Farm Bill, what does it cover? We know that there are so many things that are affected by the Farm Bill, what we eat, what we can grow, and it's going to impact all of us. So this is a chance for us to hear about what's happening. There's been a lot of uncertainty with the timeline. And we have a wonderful set of presenters lined up today, as you can see, who are going to cover the broad reach of the Farm Bill and the impact on farmers, on our access to food, and support for sustainable farming and conservation efforts. And our different groups have different goals, but we all are impacted by the Farm Bill. So it's great to lift each other up and see how these different goals can impact each other as well. So with that, I think we'll start. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, just so we know who's in the room, you can share your name and maybe your location and what you're wondering about the Farm Bill. We can get a little bit of a read of who our attendees are today. But otherwise, I think we're going to jump right into hearing a little bit of an overview about what's happening with the outlook for the Farm Bill in 2024. And I will pass over to my colleague, Michael.
Thanks, Erin, and hi, everybody. My name is Michael Hepp. I'm the Program Associate for Climate and Rural Communities at the Institute for Agriculture and Trade Policy, based here in Minnesota. We've existed since the mid-1980s in the midst of the farm crisis, and we've tried to work to combat some of the problems that led to that crisis in the first place, trying to make sure there are opportunities for small and mid-sized farmers, people farming with nature in mind, to have a good living and to not be forced off the land. So anyway, I'm going to talk, could you move to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to talk briefly about the Farm Bill, where we're at, and then pass it on to some issue experts that can dive in more detail. But in case you've been tracking the news, for a long time, people were talking about the 2023 Farm Bill. And if you haven't noticed, it is no longer 2023. We're going to have to start calling it the 2024 Farm Bill. So it's a bill that happens once every 5 years that covers so much of our food and farm system, from what we eat to what the landscape looks like, what our water quantity and quality is like, and things like crop insurance, things like rural energy, rural development, credit, and all sorts of things. There are 12 total titles to the Farm Bill. As you can see on the screen, this graph is from our friends at the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, kind of showing you a breakdown of funding from the Farm Bill, how much goes to which different parts of the pie. So again, the bulk of the bill goes toward nutrition programs, things like Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, the program formerly known as food stamps, and then smaller wedges for crop insurance, commodities, conservation. So again, the reason we don't have a 2023 Farm Bill is because Congress didn't write it in time. They've been writing bits and pieces of it, but they decided they needed a whole extra year to write it. So late last year, they passed a 1-year extension, keeping in place the status quo from the 2018 Farm Bill. But as far as we know right now, both the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives are working on their drafts of the Farm Bill. It's quite possible that those versions of the bill are going to be quite different. So it's going to be interesting to see, with a Democratic Senate and a Republican House, how they're going to be able to blend those two versions of the bill together, how close to a vote they release the bill. We recently heard from the chair of the House Agriculture Committee that he's expecting at the earliest that chamber releasing their bill in March. So again, Um, it'll be interesting to see what kind of reforms are in there or lack of. But happy to talk about that more in a little bit. Some of the big fights that have been public so far have been over nutrition and over conservation. Um, some Republicans want to take money from nutrition title and move it over to things like crop insurance and commodities. There's a lot of evidence that there's not going to be a whole lot of extra money to work with for this farm bill. So people are looking for other sources of that money. And then the other chunk of money that people are looking at taking from is the extra funding provided by the Inflation Reduction Act for climate smart practices under the conservation title. But I'm going to talk about that later. We know our good friend Amanda has a deadline to or a tight schedule today, so I'll just pass it over to her.
Thank you, Michael. And I just want to say it's really exciting to see so many Land Stewardship Project members on here today, including Bonnie Haugen, who serves on LSP's Farm Bill Organizing Committee, and Scott Smith, who serves on LSP's Crop Insurance Working Group, and Sina War, who's going to be on LSP's new Land Access and Emerging Farmers Working Group. So it's really exciting to see y'all and many others. My name is Amanda Kohler. I am the policy manager at the Land Stewardship Project. If you're not aware of LSP, we are a 42-year-old grassroots nonprofit organization made up of over 4,500 small and mid-sized farmers, rural folks, and urban and suburban allies based in the upper Midwest, organizing to build a just and sustainable farm and food system in healthy communities, which we do both through our policy work at the township, county, state, and federal level. So all of that different kind of work, as well as our programming. So we help train and support more farmers to get on the land. I'm currently in LSP's Farm Beginnings class. We have a land access and land legacy steering our program, a soil health program, and a community-based food systems program. I will talk a little bit about our full platform. So in 2022, LSP developed our Farm Bill platform, and we have to amend the title. But the Farm Bill platform is based on information gathered through a survey launched in collaboration with the National Young Farmers Coalition and the Midwest Farmers of Color Collective, with over 700 farmers and food system workers from Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And we also held 8 Farm Bill listening sessions, and 5 topics really rose to the top as the most important to our members. And I'll be talking about 2 of those a bit today: crop insurance access and land access. So the 2 bills I want to talk about today, the first is the Whole Farm Revenue Protection, or I'm sorry, the Whole Farm Revenue Program Improvement Act. So the Whole Farm Revenue Protection Program is a crop neutral revenue insurance policy designed to protect a farmer's entire operation versus just 1 or 2 crops. Under this policy, diversified and diversifying farms that might not have access to separate crop or revenue insurance policies for each crop, they can grow and insure all of their crops and livestock under just 1 policy. It's a program that has a lot of potential, but there are a lot of barriers to access it. In Minnesota, there's only a handful of farmers who use this program, and we want to be able to grow it. It works for a lot of folks, but the accessibility and some things that we need to change to make sure that it can reach its full potential. So this bill would realize the potential of the program to provide the financial resiliency and stabilities our producers need, especially in the face of climate change, as more and more diversified farmers and folks who are growing food crops are facing things like hailstorms and drought and all of those things. So specifically, there's a lot of things the bill would do. A few I just want to highlight. It would reduce a lot of paperwork burdens, expand what a micro farm is as being at least with up to 1 million in gross revenue to include all small and mid-sized farms as defined by the USDA. It will make it easier for growing farms, especially our smaller farms that scale up very quickly at the beginning of their farming, to be able to scale up and still be insured instead of being underinsured. So raising that annual limit of 35%, so that people can continue to grow without being underinsured. Expanding diversification premium discount to encourage more diverse farmers to enroll in the program. And one of the biggest barriers has actually been that crop insurance agents generally don't make a lot off of selling this kind of plan because it's very complicated. It's a lot easier to write a policy for someone who has 1 or 2 crops versus 100 different kinds of fruits, vegetables, and herbs. And so making sure that we're compensating crop insurance agents appropriately would be really helpful to making this program more accessible. As far as I know, there's only 1 or 2 agents in Minnesota who will even sell a whole farm revenue protection plan. The status. So right now it is being championed in the US Senate by Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota has been a really big champion for this as well, including it in her communications about the Farm Bill. We expect a version of this to be included in the Senate's draft Farm Bill because it's very important to the chairwoman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, Debbie Stabenow. So excited to see what parts of that are included. There is not a bill in the House. We were working with a member of Congress on introducing it and learned right before the holidays that they will not be introducing it. So there's some work to do there to make sure it's introduced in the House. The other bill I want to cover is the LASSO Act, the Land Access, Security, and Opportunities Act, which would help producers start and grow viable farm businesses, retain access to land and transition land by addressing the interrelated challenges of land, capital, markets, and technical assistance. Right now, there's a newer program called the Increasing Land, Capital, and Market Access Program. That program is currently temporary. It was created with temporary funds and has done really wonderful and excellent things, but unless the Farm Bill authorizes it, it will sunset. And so essentially what this bill would do would reauthorize that program and give it $100 million per year. So specifically, it would make this program permanent. It was launched in 2022. It's the only USDA program that is designed from the ground up to be a flexible source of support and investment that meets farmers where they are and offers a menu of eligible activities in support of increasing land, capital, and market access. An investment of this kind would really be incredibly meaningful to secure access to land for the next generation of farmers and generate immense returns for taxpayers. We're really excited about this bill. It's primarily being championed by National Young Farmers Coalition, but Land Stewardship Project has been very involved in it as well. The status of this one, the next slide. Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota is the champion. She has been an incredible champion for this. We do expect a version of this to be included in the Senate's draft Farm Bill and kind of figuring out what that would look like now. In the House, there's a ton of authors and it's being championed by Representative Nikki Budzinski. It's bipartisan in the House and has also Representative Angie Craig as a co-sponsor as well. So those are kind of some of LSP's top priorities. I know I info dumped a lot and there's a lot here. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to our Farm Bill web page, which includes fact sheets on both of these bills and our full Farm Bill platform. You can also join our action alert and update list and become an LSP member if you want. So that is all from me. And I'll also drop my email in the chat if anyone would like to reach out. Thanks so much for having me, folks.
Thank you, Amanda, for making time on a really busy day. And now you're going to go do another presentation. So good luck with that. And thank you for taking time to share today. And with that, we're going to go back to Michael to share more about the specific conservation programs that you've been charting. And I will say I'm seeing some questions come in the chat, and you can drop your questions in the chat or the Q&A. As you saw, we have a great list of panelists today. So if we have time at the end, we will try to get to some of your questions, and we'll also try to have panelists answer them in the chat or in the Q&A as well. If we don't have time to verbally answer them, we'll try to get to them that way. And we are recording this, so you can look back and relive your favorite moments of this webinar later, or save it with, share it with your friends too, if there are other people that wanted to join that couldn't make it. But I will pass it back to Michael.
Thanks, Erin, and thank you, Amanda. So yeah, I'm gonna dive a little bit more into the conservation title of the Farm Bill. So on the screen right now, we've got listed 5 different conservation programs, and this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but they're kind of regarded as the 5 big ones in the Farm Bill. And I'm really going to focus on the first 2, which are the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, or EQIP, and the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. EQIP is a conservation program that is intended to be to help farmers pay for one-off conservation projects. So if you look out in your field and you see, soil erosion, and you're like, wow, planting cover crops would really help with that, or planting a grassed waterway where this water keeps running through and taking my soil away, that would really help. But I don't necessarily have a lot of extra income to go around. So you go to your local USDA office and you say, hey, is there a way you can help me with that? And they say, yeah, we have EQIP. So it can be anywhere from a small share of the cost to up to I believe 90% if you have income issues. And if you do that one-off conservation project and you realize, wow, that did a lot for soil erosion on my farm. Look at how much cleaner the water that goes into the creek is, and you want to do more on your farm. That's where CSP, the Conservation Stewardship Program, comes in. And you can tie a lot of different conservation practices together in bundles and enhancements, and do more of that across your whole farm and see results that way. So let's say you want a lot more wildlife habitat, you can bundle that grass waterway with native grass, with a riparian buffer, with kind of a shelter belt of trees and things like that. And you work with your local conservationist on that. Just a quick rundown of these other programs. Ag Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP. That's not as common here in Minnesota, but it's intended to be used as, a lot of land trusts use this as a way to kind of prevent urban sprawl, right? Kind of preserving farmland as farmland. And there's also a part of ACEP that focuses on wetlands. Regional Conservation Partnership Program is for really large scale regional kind of resource concerns. So if you look at a certain watershed, you're like, wow, this watershed, this river has a lot of nitrates in it. It has a lot of contamination from different things. This funds partnerships of lots of different groups, lots of different farms to tackle that one resource concern. And then the Conservation Reserve Program, or CRP, that's a classic land reserve where this is land that should not be farmed. It's highly erodible. You put your land into CRP to kind of protect it and to prevent it from being farmed. It doesn't have to be highly erodible, but that is kind of where the priority is placed within that program. So as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about EQIP and CSP, and specifically how they relate to Minnesota. So next slide, please. So at IATP, I do a lot of research into these programs, and specifically looking into how these programs connect with farmers. We've heard anecdotally for a while that there are a lot of farmers who like these programs, who want to sign up for these programs and are going to apply and being rejected. But we didn't really have a good concept of how many folks were being rejected. So we kind of dove into some of those numbers. And in Minnesota, it's honestly pretty stark. So this big number here, 87.9%. Last year in 2023, that's the percentage of people who applied to CSP who are rejected. And that comes out to almost 3,000 applicants, with only 413 being awarded. And those 413 contracts equaled about $39.3 million. So CSP in Minnesota has awarded more CSP contracts than any other state in the country. We have a really long and proud tradition of conservation agriculture here in Minnesota. It's really popular. People have done a good job of building this culture of conservation, and farmers are lining up at their local offices to sign up, but there's just not enough money to go around right now. And believe it or not, that 87.9% figure is an improvement from the previous year, where 92% of applicants were denied. And at least some of the reason that percentage has gone down is because of the Inflation Reduction Act, passed by Congress, signed by President Biden, that allocates more money for a specific set of CSP practices and enhancements. Next slide, please. So the same issue you can see in EQIP. Percentages are a little bit lower, but they're still way too big. 78%, that's the number of EQIP applicants in Minnesota who are denied contracts. A little over 3,300 applicants, that's the case for. Last year, about 935 applicants were awarded contracts for a total of 41.7 million. And that's not just for the practices themselves. That's also money that's going toward technical assistance. That's I can go into the numbers a little bit more in a little bit. But again, unfortunately, the number has gone up from the previous year for EQIP denials. In 2022, 73.4% of applicants were denied. And again, USDA has done a good job of marketing that there is extra money from the Inflation Reduction Act, so much so that there are more people lining up at the doors, so the percentages are lower. But in total numbers of folks being served by these programs, that number has actually gone up. And we're hoping that that trend continues, and that the main point I want to make is that even with this extra money, it's just barely scratching the surface for the demand that's out there for conservation and moving toward more agroecological systems. Next slide, please. So just kind of showing graphically the trend of people getting connected to these contracts over time. And you can see, back several years, the acceptance rate was much higher, especially for CSP. In the 2018 Farm Bill, they really, really weakened CSP, and the 2014 Farm Bill as well, changing, pretty much putting a big cap over how many CSP dollars can go out the door. So that's affected specifically Minnesota, which again has this really great tradition of conservation agriculture. And you can see just a little bit of an increase toward the end here with that IRA money. Next slide, please. Sorry, yes, the graph before was nationwide. This graph here is for Minnesota. So it's lower in Minnesota than it is nationwide. Next slide, please. And then I want to just highlight with the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, the top 5 practices in Minnesota by dollar amount in 2023, and point out some differences. So the number 1 EQIP practice was waste facility cover. So essentially, if you're a large dairy and you have a large manure lagoon, there's a lot of methane being emitted, a lot of potential for leakage. This helps pay for a cover over that. Next popular next most popular program from dollar amount is cover crops. And just take a look at the number of contracts served by those two practices and the last column, the average contract amount. Waste facility covers are very, very expensive, as are things like waste storage facilities. Meanwhile, things like cover crops, less than $7,000 per contract, they serve a lot more farmers. A bill that Amanda didn't cover, but I'll mention briefly, is the EQIP Improvement Act. So basically what that bill would do is put a cap on how much EQIP money you're eligible for over the course of 4 or 5 years. Right now, the cap is $450,000 per operation, and this bill would lower that to $150,000. And kind of the intent behind this is, okay, if we can't have extra money for EQIP, at least kind of targeting the funding towards small and mid-sized farmers who really need the money and steering it away from the larger scale operations that are using these huge contracts. And again, it's amazing how similar the dollars spent column is between waste facility cover and cover crops. We're seeing pretty much the same amount of money going toward these two practices, but just vastly different numbers of farmers being served. Next slide, please. And I've just got a little bit of information here about the Inflation Reduction Act that passed a couple years ago, just a breakdown of how much money went to these different conservation programs. It was a total of almost $20 billion over 5 years to all conservation programs. Most of the highest amount going to EQIP, $8.45 billion, almost $5 billion for RCPP, $3.25 for CSP, almost $1.5 for ASEP, $1 billion for conservation technical assistance. I want to underscore this and move on as well as I can. We really need more support in local USDA offices. Not only is USDA understaffed, the people who do work there are very much underpaid. We have this application crisis, and those local conservationists are the ones helping people through all these forms. They're really lengthy forms. Pretty much all they do is paperwork, and kind of similar to what Amanda was saying about crop insurance policies and it being easier to send out 1 or 2 crop policies. It is easier for a local conservation agent to send out those larger contracts to a handful of farmers rather than doing outreach to more small scale farmers, more farmers of color, more folks that might even be farming on an acre or less of land. Those are really complicated contracts to fill out. And if you're used to doing a large scale waste facility cover contract, or you're used to doing things that are more targeted toward that large scale farm, you're more likely to do that because that, again, there's a lot of pressure to get money out the door, and that's a really easy way to do it. And then just want to highlight, Minnesota is trying out some things to kind of augment what the US government is doing. Last year, they tried out a Minnesota soil health financial assistance pilot program, helping farmers with between $500 and $50,000 conservation needs. There's maybe some hope from an EPA grant that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is applying for that could potentially bring some more funding for conservation-focused agriculture. Next slide. Opportunities for engagement. Again, a lot of Farm Bill marker bills have already been introduced. Senate and House are already writing their versions of the Farm Bill, but there's still opportunities to advocate. Bills like the EQIP Improvement Act, bills like the Agriculture Resilience Act that bolster these conservation programs, there's still time to write into your lawmakers and support those. There's a need for more data transparency. There's a lot we don't know about who's applying for what, exact sizes of contracts. There's very much a lack of data on how farmers of color are doing, specifically comparing between populations. We don't know how Black farmers in Minnesota are doing in accessing these programs versus Native farmers versus Asian American farmers. And I think that would be really helpful information to have to better target these resources. Minnesota has a state technical advisory committee where some decisions are made about how to allocate conservation dollars. There's also county committees made up of farmers kind of focusing on what are the resource concerns for a place like Fillmore County or for Pipestone County or something similar. And then once the Farm Bill is passed, there will be opportunities to comment on how to run these programs. They're going to interpret the Farm Bill. They're going to say, this is how we think the Farm Bill told us to run CSP. And then there will be opportunities for comment on that. So keep an eye out for materials from us on that. And then the yearly appropriations process. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, just closing with showing some pictures about what conservation projects mean. Imagine if we were able to reform how much money goes out and improve resources for farmers who want to do the right thing. Imagine the amount of living cover we could have, amount of silvopasture folks could try out, buffer strips. Imagine how many small scale farmers could extend their growing season with things like hoop houses. So anyway, want to pass it off to our next awesome presenter and the other experts on the panel.
Thank you, Michael. And next we're going to hear from Erin Parker, who is the Executive Director of the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative. And I had the pleasure to hear Erin present and give a really excellent overview of the Farm Bill at the Native Nutrition Conference in the fall. And I'm so excited to have her share with us today. So I will skip ahead to your slides and pass it to you, Erin.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you, Michael, for getting us started. Thanks for having me. Happy to talk about the Farm Bill anytime. So the Indigenous Food and Agriculture Initiative is the official research partner to the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So most of what I'm focusing on today is going to be about the Native Farm Bill Coalition's work and the opportunities that the NFBC has seen to support tribal sovereignty and Indian agriculture in the next Farm Bill, hopefully the 2024 Farm Bill. You want to go to the next slide? I wanted to share just a little bit of background about the NFBC in general. So the Native Farm Bill Coalition formed in 2017, just ahead of the 2018 Farm Bill. The coalition was founded by the Shakopee, Mdewakanton, and Sioux community alongside the Intertribal Agriculture Council, National Congress of American Indians, and my organization, the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative, as the research partner. This was really the first time that Indian country had a strong unified voice on the Farm Bill about opportunities in this critical legislation to support tribal sovereignty, to support tribal control of agricultural processes and food systems that have supported the health and well-being of Indigenous people on this continent for thousands of years. So it was a pretty significant moment in time for Indian country ag. And by the end of the 2018 Farm Bill process, there were 63 tribal-specific provisions included in the final legislation, which was the most that had ever happened in any Farm Bill. All of those were tribally led, which was really wonderful to see. So we go to the next slide, we can talk about what actually, you can just go ahead and skip 2 slides. There, one more. You can do one more. It's fine. We'll make up some time. So the current Native Farm Bill Coalition policy opportunities that you can see for Indian country and what would have been the 2023 Farm Bill, now hopefully the 2024 Farm Bill, are all contained in this document, Gaining Ground. It's a sequel to a report that we did back in 2017, looks at all 12 titles of the Farm Bill and ways that all of the USDA's programs and authorities can support food security for Native people, for tribal sovereignty, economic development through agriculture for tribal producers, of which we know there are at least 80,000 across what is today the United States, according to the last National Census of Agriculture, also supporting, of course, natural resource stewardship and infrastructure development in rural areas where many tribes are. If you want to go to the next slide. Just really quickly, Michael gave a great overview at the top of why the Farm Bill is important, generally what it supports. This is just a little more context for why this is important to Indian country agriculture. If you look at the Native American crosscut that the White House Office of Management and Budget puts out, this one's from 2022, you can see USDA has more federal dollars available to tribes than other agencies, including the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So because the Farm Bill provides a significant amount of that funding authority, this is a really, really important piece of legislation for Indian country and for us all. So if you want to go to the next one, we can talk a little bit about what the coalition's been up to. Obviously, we hope we'd have a Farm Bill by now, but we do have that extension that goes to September 30th of this year. If you want to go to the next slide, we've got a little more info about what's going on and some of the priorities the coalition's been tracking. So the opportunities for Indian country in the Farm Bill, really trying to build on that success from 2018. There were a couple of really important key provisions in 2018 that were included for that supported tribal sovereignty that the coalition was hoping to build on for the next Farm Bill. And one of those is 638 authority. If you don't work in Indian country or with tribes, you may be unfamiliar with that. So 638, you may also hear called tribal self-governance or self-gov, compacting, self-determination, contracting. All of that is referring to Public Law 93-638, that's the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, was passed in the 1970s. And what that does is recognize tribes as sovereign nations who are able to support the health, safety, and welfare of their people on their lands by running programs, services, activities, functions, doing that using federal dollars as an acknowledgement of the trust responsibility that the federal government owes to tribal nations, but to do that in a way that is actually tailored and appropriate to that particular tribal community, which not only results in better access to programs for individual tribal citizens, but also often cost savings because it's the tribe spending the money directly rather than a federal actor from afar. Nobody knows how to stretch a dollar like a tribal leader, so that often results in those cost savings as well as improved program access. That had never applied to USDA until the 2018 Farm Bill. It applies now in two places, two pilot projects, one in the forestry title and another one in the nutrition title. So there are several marker bills out there that we can see. If you want to go to the next slide, that would actually open up or expand more 638 opportunities at USDA in the next Farm Bill. We can start with the FDIPR Tribal Food Sovereignty Act of 2023, co-sponsored by Senators Tina Smith of Minnesota and Senator Hoeven of North Dakota, as well as the Arctic Act by Senator Murkowski from Alaska. All of those would take one of those pilot opportunities from the 18 bill in the nutrition title and make it permanent, which would provide more stability for it, offer more opportunities for Native producers to get foods into the programs that are supporting the health and well-being of folks within their communities. Similar to that, the Tribal Food Sovereignty Act, again, you see Senator Smith up here as one of the co-sponsors on that bill, would expand the 638 authority to SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Tribes can't operate SNAP directly under the current state of the law. There are about 3 tribes that have been able to go through kind of a gauntlet type process administratively and figure out how to do that kind of in partnership with the state. That's not a good option for every tribe, depends on the relationship that tribe has with their state. And there's just a lot of paperwork and administrative wrangling involved in that. So this would open up a more direct opportunity if it was included. And then there's a couple of bills as well, the Prime Act and the Arctic Act, that would expand 638 authority to some food safety inspection contexts. Outside of those marker bills, if you want to go to the next slide, there's several other things. This list, by the way, is not an exhaustive list of the marker bills the coalition tracks. This is just a snapshot, but there are several other things that would support tribal sovereignty in the next Farm Bill as well. One of those would be allowing the dual use of SNAP and the food distribution program on Indian reservations. Those two programs cannot be used at the same time by the same person in each month, even if they qualify for both. That's pretty unusual in the world of nutrition programs. If you look at like WIC and SNAP, you can use those together. If you look at TFAP and SNAP, you can use those together, but these two programs you cannot. This bill, co-sponsored by Senators Patty Murray and Catherine Cortez Masto, would remove that statutory prohibition because that's actually in the law. So that's one of the ones that the coalition is tracking as well. Increasing flexibility just generally for FDIPR as well has been a priority of the coalition, just to make sure that the FDIPR has the flexibility that it needs to operate. And then finally, I wanted to shout out Section 802 of the Arctic Act, which is, again, Senator Murkowski's bill. That would expand the Buy Indian Act to USDA. And expanding Buy Indian to USDA would mean that USDA would be looking at contracting with Native-owned vendors more than they do presently. Like that, you look first to a Native vendor under Buy Indian. So it's a good economic development opportunity for Native-owned companies who are doing business with USDA. And I think that is it for me. So I want to turn it over to Devon, I believe. Thank you all.
Thank you, Erin. That was such a great overview. Really good information. It's good to see Senator Smith in there as an advocate too. So with that, we will pass over to Devon Nolan, who is the founder and market manager for the People's Market Minneapolis. And you can take it away, Devon.
Thank you so much. Devon Nolan with the People's Market and PLS. And just want to say I'm grateful for the synergy with the other presenters. We didn't get to see what they were going to present, so it's exciting to see and learn from you. So thank you for that. My work is at the intersection of food and energy. And so I'm always thinking about and planning for 7 generations after me. They're going to tell great and mighty stories about their great grandma. And so, but also acknowledging the atrocious history. We've heard some from my colleagues about, just some of the level setting in which we're doing this work. We are in Minnesota. Context matters. These conditions are not by happenstance. They've been engineered. And often by bad policy that only serves a certain sector of our society. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So I am an activator, an activist, an urban grower, farmers market manager, and a developer. And there's about 100 other bullets that I could have put on this slide, as I'm sure with all of you, but I really just wanted to focus on the fact that my work is really action oriented. It's really, policy is necessary, but unless there's strategies for implementation, it's really hard to see the impacts. One of the ideas that I come with is something I was introduced to by my elder Michael Chaney, is that just this food as a basic human right. And that goes across every level, all the way up to United Nations. Everyone's kind of this is the mantra, like as a basic human right. And that sticks in the back of my mind. So you can go to the next slide. Had the pleasure of working on the 2018 Farm Bill, and which I learned a lot. I'll talk more about that in other slides, but really just the power of policy, like policy in action. And so this slide was important to me because I know we're focusing on Farm Bill, federal policy, but those of us who do this work probably understand the power of what happens in our local communities and how that plays up. And so you'll hear more about the transformational Farm Bill work with the Good Food for All, which is at the national level. I'm also serve with Homegrown Minneapolis Food Policy Council. If you have not seen our Minneapolis Food Vision, please check it out. That's looking at food in the city of Minneapolis, and also the Metro Food Justice Network, where we're talking Twin Cities wide. Right, we do play across the river, and we do play nice. Right, Leah, I see some of my colleagues from MFJN on the call. And then something that's near and dear to my heart is the Northside Fresh Coalition. So this is at the grassroots level where we're really able to build a base of people in action. You can go to the next slide. As I mentioned, I got a chance to work on the 2018 Farm Bill, learned a lot. I will say that, got to visit the White House and Congress and USDA. And one of my big takeaways is that these are just people. These are people who are making decisions about my life without my input. And so I decided to help fix that. Oftentimes thinking through, like, how do you translate what's on the hearts and needs of the people into an 807-page document? Because it's 807 pages. Who knows how long the 2024 farm will end up being, but that's a lot. And a document that will live beyond the current needs, right? And so in the picture there, you'll see some of the work that I've had the pleasure of doing through the Good Food for All Coalition, in conjunction with the Union of Concerned Scientists, in which we have partners from, that's so small on my screen, I'm sorry, I'm trying to zoom in. I won't read it verbatim, from across the nation, who are really working toward, having a strategy around a transformational Farm Bill. Go to the next slide. Part of why this is important, and you can see the press release there that went out in September, that there's a long history of our food being weaponized against the people. And we need protections from seed all the way to saving the food and all along that whole ecosystem. And we need to address the harms that have been done along the way to several people groups, right? And so part of that is, thinking about what comes next. You can go to the next slide. Some of the things that we're prioritizing are key demands for the future Farm Bill are listed there. It's another long document where I just tried to pull out some high level points. I'm also one of those presenters. I don't like to read my slides. It's just a thing for me. I don't know why, but I'm happy to share these after if folks have questions. But really building a climate resilient food and farm system is overarching theme, right? Can you go to the next one, please? Yeah. And some of the things I'll point out, just to call out, because I'm trying to condense it now because we're crunched for time. But just around racial justice and being able to prioritize the needs of BIPOC producers in all the federal food and agriculture programs, including technical assistance, improve funding allocations, and the ease of application and grant processes, enacting policies like the Justice for Black Farmers Act. You'll hear more about that. And so we really got into the technical pieces of what our demands were. And I'm not saying ask, I'm saying demands, right? Because this is our government, they work for us. We did hear a little more about marker bills. I have this slide in here, just in case folks weren't familiar with that process. We can go to the next slide. Here are some of the marker bills that we've been endorsing and supporting just along the way until we get to a farm bill, right? Because we know that food and farming is across lots of things other than just the farm bill, climate and other things, beginning farmer and ranchers, development programs, all these different things that will in turn have the impacts that we're hoping for, but maybe not directly in the farm bill. The next slide, please. One of the things I wanted to call out, I'd have Dr. Jazz there, one, because I just love this picture of her. I'm such a fangirl of Dr. Jazz and the National Black and Food Justice Alliance. She also is one of my colleagues with GFFA, Good Food for All, and really being able to think through the history of how we've gotten here and really being able to have Justice for Black Farmers Act and reintroducing that and saying that we've put a lot of work and thought into how to start to rectify some of the harms that have been caused. And we don't leave all the thinking to our electeds. We can actually help you with that. We can help you write it. You can go to the next slide. Here we go. A lot of the work is just around translating the Farm Bill, really understanding those most heavily impacted. Oppression breeds lack, so I don't always have the time, capacity, interest, or understanding to get involved with the Farm Bill. Also understanding something I was taught by one of my illustrious colleagues at the Public Policy Project, James Trice, is that people have more power than they realize. That organized people and organized money equal power. And that's how we get the Farm Bill that we desire, that we define it, that it's our destiny, and we need to promote self-reliance in our Farm Bill. Knowing what to do and become an expert on something, right, as it relates to it, whether it's agricultural practices or anything along the spectrum. I'm just trying to be concise. Thank you. Next slide. And to that point of like what's next, a big part of the work I think will be important as we're helping our electeds are figuring out how to write this, is building a base for action, being able to respond versus react. So really having clear demands defined that come from community, that can translate to the resources that we need coming into the communities that we know are heavily impacted. To think global, but act local. The power again of our local government and coalitions, really fostering authentic public-private partnerships, and keeping in mind that this takes time. It takes generations often for some of the changes we are hoping for, and I'm hoping it won't. I'm hoping we can really get some depth in the impacts that we're hoping for. So next slide, I think it's the last one. Yes, thank you for listening. My contact information is there.
Thank you, Devon. I especially appreciate the translation piece because it can be hard to navigate if you're not familiar with this world. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Leah, just to give us a short update on what we're watching for around nutrition and food access priorities.
Yeah, I can thankfully keep it simple. I want to just say that, really everything that the wonderful presenters before me have already touched on, it's all super important. All that's interrelated to why people experience hunger in the first place, in many cases, right? So, looking at this through an anti-hunger lens, we need a better functioning, more just food system. So I just want to underscore how important I realize all of the different things that people have already said are, and why we want to see a solid Farm Bill move forward. Because the next thing that I'm going to say is any cuts to SNAP are a non-starter. Any legislators or our congresspeople entertaining that are killing the chance of getting a Farm Bill done. And I think that we need to stay really crystal clear on that, because the appetite for cuts, for some reason, on SNAP, like right now, we're looking at a potential government shutdown on WIC. Why? Why are we trying to target women and infants and not wanting to feed them? I mean, that's just the climate that we're in, whether we like it or not. So just we're going to be really firm in the anti-hunger community that no cuts to SNAP are acceptable. Food insecurity continues to be at an all-time high, unfortunately increasing, not even leveling off necessarily yet. So it's no cuts. That's where we're at. If we're able to think past that, there are good things we can do. We already mentioned not having to have people choose between FDIPR food versus SNAP. We'd love to see people be able to make hot food purchases. So buying a prepared meal at a grocery store, not just cold foods. So there are some, I'm just naming some things that maybe there's a glimmer of bipartisan support for, but I'll keep it short because it really is simple. We're not even going to get into a lot of the dream stuff until we can just get past an understanding among all people in Congress that we are not going to cut SNAP. So that's where we're at. And if we, in from our perspective, no farm bill is better than a bad farm bill. So we don't need to pass something in order for SNAP to continue. And I realize that's not the case for everything else, but we're not going to do anything until we get to that agreement. So help us out, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, for ending on a very concise note and super important. And thank you to all of our presenters today, Michael, Amanda, Aaron, Devon, and Leah. This was so excellent, and I really appreciate you taking the time to share today. And we will share out the recording so you can forward it to your colleagues as well. And I am looking forward to partnering with all of you, and hopefully we can have a good farm bill, the next iteration of the farm bill. So thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.